All right, so are you ready to really dive deep into one of the most famous stories of all time? We're talking Noah's Ark, but we're going way beyond the typical Sunday school version. You've sent over some sources that go much deeper, and I have to say, this is way more fascinating than just animals marching two by two.
Yeah, it really is. What's so intriguing is how often people just see this story as this basic survival tale. But the sources you shared, they hint at a much more complicated story, maybe even a controversial one.
Exactly. So we have this massive flood,
Yeah.
right, sent by God. But what's the real reason? Is it just about punishing a wicked world? Or is there something more to it? And where do these giants fit in? I'm so curious about that. Get comfortable, because this is where things start to get really, really interesting.
Okay, well let's start by setting the scene, right? With that familiar story from Genesis. You know, the world's just consumed by wickedness and God decides to cleanse everything with a flood. Noah, this righteous dude, he's chosen to build an ark and save his family and of course two of every animal.
And we're not talking about some little boat here, like a weekend fishing trip, right? The ark was huge, GE. Genesis says it was 300 cubits long. 300, can you even imagine? That's like over 500 feet. Longer than a football field. I mean, WHY built something so massive. Was it really just about surviving the floodwaters? Or was there something else going on? A deeper purpose?
Yeah, the sheer size of the ark, it really raises some interesting questions. What if, and I'm just throwing this out there, but what if it wasn't only about staying afloat? What if it was about protecting something very specific, like maybe a specific bloodline, like a pure and untainted version of humanity? It's almost like God was hitting the reset button for the entire world, you know what I mean?
A reset button. Wow, okay,
Yeah.
so the flood was this divine judgment against all the wickedness going on. Got it. But then we have these mysterious Nephilim mentioned in Genesis. Who were they exactly?
So the Nephilim, they're often described as giants. And the sources say they were the children of the sons of God and daughters of men. There's like this mixing of heaven and earth. And it was seen as this huge source of chaos and corruption.
Hold on, wait a minute. So you're saying there were godlike beings having kids with humans. That's some serious divine intervention. But how does that fit into the whole story? Were all these Nephilim bad? Or what?
Well, the text describes them as mighty and of great renown. So that can mean a few things.
Right.
Were they powerful rulers, fearsome warriors, or maybe something else entirely? The sources are a little vague, open to interpretation, you know. What do you think about the Nephilim? Based on what you've read so far, I mean.
It just makes you wonder what kind of chaos they must have caused to make God decide that a world-ending flood was the answer, you know? And if the flood was meant to wipe them out, does that mean all giants were considered evil? Were there any good ones?
That is a fascinating question. Yeah. It definitely challenges that black and white idea of good versus evil. Like maybe it was more complicated. It forces us to consider, I don't know, maybe the complexities of these ancient beings. They were more than just good or evil, you know?
Okay, so we have this world filled with wickedness, maybe even influenced by these crazy powerful Nephilim. God decides that a reset is needed, a hard reset, right? But why choose Noah? Of all people, what made him so special? It wasn't just because he was handy with a hammer, was it?
You're really picking up on something important there.
Yeah.
You're right. Noah wasn't just some random guy who could build a boat. He was chosen because he was considered a righteous man. This suggests that the whole point of the ark wasn't just about saving any life at all. It was more about preserving something pure, like a specific lineage that could start the world over, but better this time.
So it's not just a rescue mission. It's more like a divine selection process, right?
Yeah.
Like some kind of quality control check from God. Wow. But if that's the case, does that mean everyone else besides Noah's family was just beyond saving?
That's a tough one. Maybe the flood wasn't just about punishment, but about creating a fresh start, you know, like a clean slate for all of humanity. It shows us that God judges, but also that there's always the potential for a new beginning.
A fresh start. I like that. It really makes you think about, how history repeats itself. Are we humans just doomed to keep making the same mistakes over and over again? I mean, just look around.
That is a question that people have been asking forever.
Yeah.
You see echoes of the flood story in so many different cultures and myths and stories throughout history. It speaks to this deep-seated fear of total destruction, but also that hope for a new beginning, you know, a chance to get things right.
Speaking of echoes, what about the actual ark? Did it really exist? Where did it end up? I mean, come on, it was enormous.
Now that's where the story gets even more interesting. Yeah. People have been searching for Noah's Ark for centuries. It's amazing. Mount Ararat in Turkey, that's the place mentioned in Genesis. And it's been the focus of tons of expeditions.
It's incredible. I can't even imagine how dedicated you'd have to be to search for something like that. Scaling mountains, dealing with crazy conditions, all for the chance to uncover a piece of history that could literally rewrite everything we know about the past.
Some people even claim that they've found strange structures on Ararat, or they've seen arc-shaped things in satellite images. But so far, nobody has found definitive proof.
So it's still a mystery. Is the Ark still up there, buried under ice? Or was it taken apart for lumber? Or maybe it's just gone forever, lost to time. It's a real-life mystery that still fascinates people all over the world.
It is. And you know what's so interesting? Even without actually finding the Ark, the story itself, it still has so much power. It shows how much we want to connect with the past, to find real physical evidence for these ancient stories.
Totally. It's like the ultimate treasure hunt. But even beyond finding the actual Ark, there's so much more to uncover in the story itself. Let's go back to the Nephilim for a minute. What happened to them in the end? The sources are a little vague, but you can't deny their connection to all the corruption in the world before the flood.
Their fate. It's one of the most interesting parts of this whole story. How were they destroyed? Did they all die in the flood? Were there survivors? And what does their disappearance tell us about the world we live in now? Those are some great questions to think about. And we'll keep exploring those as we continue our deep dive into the amazing multi-layered story of Noah's Ark.
It's wild to think about, right? The fate of the Nephilim. It's like this big question mark hanging over the whole story. Really gets those brain cells firing.
Yeah, definitely one of the most interesting parts of this whole thing. Makes you look beyond the simple stuff and really think about some complex ideas.
So if they were so powerful, how were they actually destroyed? Did they all, drown? Or were they somehow less able to survive than humans and animals?
You know, the sources, they don't really get into the specifics of how they were wiped out. But the flood, it's described as this huge cleansing event, right? So, I mean, whether they drowned or were crushed by the force of the water or just swept away, the message seems pretty clear. They had to go.
Which, okay, that makes sense. But it brings up another question. If they were the kids of, sons of God mating with humans, why weren't those sons of God spared? Wouldn't they be on the Ark too?
See, that's where things get really interesting. There are a lot of different interpretations. Some people believe that the sons of God were actually fallen angels, rebellious beings who were punished for what they did. Others see it more metaphorically, like a representation of the corruption that had spread into humanity itself.
Oh, interesting. So maybe it wasn't about actual physical beings being on the Ark, but more about getting rid of that corrupted lineage from the world, like symbolically purifying humanity's, spiritual DNA or something.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of this story. Judgment, purification, and ultimately renewal. The flood, it wasn't just about destruction. It was about making a space for something new to begin.
Okay, yeah, it's like wiping the slate clean, a second chance. But if that's true, then why is there still so much bad stuff happening today? So much wickedness and corruption, I mean. Did the flood actually do what it was supposed to?
Wow, that's a really deep question. It really makes you think about human nature, doesn't it? The story of Noah's Ark, it doesn't give us easy answers, but it definitely makes us think about how history repeats itself and about the constant struggle between good and evil, and the choices that we make both as individuals and as a society. Tough stuff.
It's almost like a warning, right? A reminder of what can happen if we let corruption take over. But then there's also that glimmer of hope, the idea that even after something so devastating, there's still a chance to start fresh.
You got it. That's a really important point. It's not all doom and gloom. The story also shows us how resilient humans are and how we can always renew ourselves. And that's where Noah is so important. He's not just a guy who built a boat. He's a symbol of faith, obedience, and that never give up spirit that humans have.
He was way ahead of his time, wasn't he? The ultimate prepper. But instead of stocking up on supplies, he was protecting, the very essence of humanity. Pretty cool.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what makes this story so timeless, It speaks to something deep inside all of us, that need to survive, that hope for a better future, and the power to start over. It goes beyond culture and religion and all that. It's just human.
It reminds us that even when things seem impossible, there's always a chance to figure things out and find a way forward. And maybe, just maybe, make things better for the future. Speaking of building a better future, let's talk about the search for the actual Ark again. What are your thoughts on all those expeditions and claims that people have made over the years?
The fact that people are still out there searching for it,
Yeah.
it just shows you how powerful this story really is.
Yeah.
People want to connect with the past, to find real proof of these events. And the Ark, it's so big and so symbolic. It's no wonder people are obsessed with it.
I know, right? It's like the ultimate lost treasure. And Mount Ararat, it's so rugged and mysterious, it just adds to the whole thing. Have you ever thought about going on an expedition yourself?
Honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah, a part of me would love to see Mount Ararat in person. It's like this mythical place,
Yeah.
right? The perfect spot for something as legendary as Noah's Ark. But, even if we never find the physical Ark, the story itself is so powerful, makes us wonder, makes us use our imaginations, and that's pretty amazing on its own.
Totally agree. It keeps us curious and keeps us exploring. But before we send all our listeners off to go ark hunting, let's get back to the sources for a minute. What are some of the key takeaways that you think are important?
Well, first of all, I think we need to remember that Noah's Ark is more than just a kid's story. It's complicated, with lots of different layers of meaning. It makes us think about judgment, purification, and renewal. Really big concepts.
Yeah, it's about understanding that our actions have consequences both for ourselves and for the world. But it's also about hope and about new beginnings, even when things seem really, really bad.
Exactly. And whether you take it literally or see it as a metaphor, it's a story that resonates with us because it reflects something very real about what it means to be human.
It leaves us with some pretty big questions to think about, doesn't it? Like, what does it even mean to be righteous today? Are we heading for our own kind of flood with all the bad stuff happening in the world? And what kind of ark do we need to build to survive the challenges that are coming our way?
Those are great questions. And that's exactly the kind of stuff that this deep dive is all about, getting people thinking and talking about these things.
So to all our listeners out there, we've given you a little taste of the world of Noah's Ark, the flood, and those mysterious Nephilim. But this is just the start. There's a whole world of information out there. What are you curious about? What are you going to research? We've gone pretty deep on this one, haven't we? The flood, the ark, the Nephilim. So many mysteries. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, what does it all mean for us, like today? Is this just some ancient story? Or can we learn something from it and apply it to our modern world?
That's the question, right? Yeah, I don't think there's one easy answer, but I think that's part of what makes this whole Noah's Ark thing so interesting. It makes us think about our place in the world and the choices we make and what happens because of those choices.
It's almost like the story is holding up this mirror, right?
Yeah.
Showing us that we're capable of both good and evil. I mean, we see all the corruption that led to the flood, but we also see the hope that Noah and his family represent. It really does make you wonder if we're going to make the same mistakes all over again.
That idea of history repeating itself, it pops up in stories all the time. Are we really doomed to keep messing up? Or can we learn from the past and do better this time? The Noah story doesn't really tell us, but it definitely makes us think about it.
It also makes you think about, God's involvement in all of this. If God was willing to basically wipe out humanity once, could it happen again? I mean, are we being judged for our actions right now, even if we don't see a flood coming?
People have been debating those questions for centuries, haven't they? And a lot of times they just lead to even more questions. But I think it's important to really think about these things, to wrestle with the ideas and trying to figure out what they mean in our own lives. That's what it's all about.
It's like the story itself is this giant puzzle that we're all trying to solve. And maybe, the search itself, the questioning and exploring is just as important as finding the actual answer.
That's a great point. It really is about the journey. Maybe the real treasure isn't finding the actual ark, but it's all the things we learn and think about along the way.
Okay, so after going on this deep dive, what really stands out to you? What are you going to explore further?
I'm just fascinated by the fact that these stories are still so powerful. They grab our attention and make us question what we think we know, and they remind us that there are some questions that humans have been trying to answer forever.
They also inspire us to keep learning, keep searching, and keep trying to be better people. So to all our listeners, I say keep exploring the world of Noah's Ark. Read more, research different interpretations, and let your curiosity lead the way. This is just the beginning. Who knows what you might discover?
I agree. There's no single right way to understand this story. Just keep asking questions, keep an open mind, and keep exploring.
Until next time, happy diving, everyone.